From a ball that somehow refused to roll into the water, to a shot through the trees that no sane player should even try, to collapses and comebacks that still feel unreal, these are the 10 most shocking moments in Masters history. And first, we start with number 10. 10. Fred Couples' ball stays out of Rae's Creek. In a tournament like the Masters, sometimes the shocking moment is not a miracle shot. Sometimes it is a miracle break. That is exactly what happened to Fred Couples in 1992 on the 12th hole, one of the most nerve-wracking par threes in golf. Couples hit his tee shot, and for a second it looked fine. Then the ball started spinning back. And once it began rolling toward Rae's Creek, everybody watching had the same thought: that ball is going into the water. But somehow it stopped. Not in the water, but not comfortably safe either, just hanging there on the bank, inches from disaster. And that is what makes this moment so unforgettable. There was nothing dramatic about the swing itself. The drama came from watching the ball flirt with the worst possible outcome and then, at the last second, refused to cross the line. Couples got away with par, stayed in the game, and went on to win his only Masters. The whole thing felt like Augusta itself had made a decision. That moment also sets the tone for this whole list, because the Masters has always had this strange ability to make golf feel supernatural. And if Couples got one of Augusta's luckiest breaks, the next man on this list created one of its most emotional finishes. 9. Phil Mickelson finally wins his first major in 2004. Before 2004, Phil Mickelson had already built a reputation. He was brilliant, creative, wildly entertaining, and one of the most talented players in the world. He just had one problem. He had never won a major. And the longer that went on, the heavier it became, not because people doubted his talent, but because the gap between his talent and his resume was starting to look strange. He had too much game to still be stuck in the almost category. Then came Sunday at Augusta. Ernie Els was charging. The pressure was huge, and Mickelson stepped onto the 18th green knowing exactly what was in front of him. Make the birdie putt, and the wait was over. Miss it, and the story probably gets even more painful. Then he made it. And the reason that putt still lands so hard is because of everything that exploded right after it. The leap, the release, the look on his face. That was not just a guy winning a golf tournament. That was years of pressure leaving his body in one instant. He beat Els by one shot and finally had his first major title. For most players, that kind of moment would define a career forever. For Phil, it was only the beginning. Because 6 years later, he gave Augusta one of the most ridiculous shots it has ever seen. But before we get there, we need to talk about Bubba. 8. Bubba Watson bends reality in the 2012 playoff. There are recovery shots. There are great recovery shots. And then there is whatever Bubba Watson did in the playoff at the 2012 Masters. He got himself into trouble on the 10th. Deep trouble, trees everywhere, bad angle, playoff pressure, first major on the line. For a normal player, the goal there is simple. Get back in position, give yourself a chance, and just try to survive. But Bubba Watson was never a normal player. Instead of choosing safety, he chose imagination. He hooked the ball wildly out of the trees, around the corner, and onto the green. It was the kind of shot that looks fake even when you are watching the replay from 3 different angles. And the amazing part is, this was not some lucky accident. Bubba has always played with that kind of fearless instinct. His own words fit the moment perfectly. He said he attacks, always attacks, and wants to hit the incredible shot. That is exactly what happened here. He did not just solve the problem. He solved it in the most Bubba way imaginable, then went on to win his first green jacket. But a couple years before that, Phil Mickelson gave us something even more reckless, because his shot was not just creative, it felt borderline irresponsible. 7. Phil Mickelson goes through the trees in 2010. If you ever want one shot that explains why people loved watching Phil Mickelson, this is probably it. Final round, Masters on the line, 13th hole. Phil's drive ends up in the pine straw. He has 207 yards left. Trees are in front of him. Rays Creek is waiting. And the sensible play is to lay up. Phil did not lay up. He looked at the tiny gap between the trees and decided that was enough. Later, he said the gap was not huge, but it was big enough for a ball to fit through. That tells you everything you need to know about how his brain worked. Most people see danger. Phil saw opportunity. Then he hit a 6, iron through that gap, over Rays Creek, and onto the green. It is still one of the most jaw-dropping shots in Masters history because it feels like the kind of decision that only becomes legendary if it works. If it goes wrong, people call it reckless. But if it comes off, it becomes immortal, and that is what happened here. Even Lee Westwood said it was one of the few shots only Phil could pull off, and he was right. Plenty of players had the skill to understand the shot. Very few had the nerve to actually hit it. Phil did, and it helped carry him to another Masters title. That is the fun side of Augusta chaos. But now we move to the cruel side, because the next moment is one of the fastest and most painful collapses the tournament has ever seen. 6. Jordan Spieth's collapse at the 12th in 2016. For most of the afternoon, it felt like Jordan Spieth was heading toward back-to-back Masters titles. He looked calm, he looked in control. Then he reached the 12th, and in less than 10 minutes, the tournament changed completely. Spieth hit one ball into the water, then another, then the damage kept growing. By the time he walked off that green with a quadruple bogey 7, the whole tournament had been flipped upside down. That hole took him only 9 minutes and 57 seconds, which somehow makes it even more surreal, less than 10 minutes. That is all it took for one of the strongest positions in golf to turn into one of the most famous meltdowns in Masters history. Even Spieth later admitted that this one would hurt and would take a while. Of course it would. Everybody watching could feel it in real time. That collapse was sudden and brutal. The next one on our list is a completely different story. 5. Larry Mize chips in to win the 1,987 Masters. Some Masters moments feel shocking because of the difficulty. Others feel shocking because of the story. Larry Mize in 1987 had both. Here was an Augusta native in a playoff against Greg Norman, one of the biggest stars in golf. And on the second playoff hole, Mize chipped in from off the 11th green for birdie to win the Masters. Just say that out loud, and it already sounds made up. A local player, in Augusta, at the Masters, in a playoff, beating Greg Norman with a chip-in. That is sports fairy tale stuff, the kind of ending that would feel cheesy if it happened in a movie. But it happened for real, and that is why it still lives so strongly in Masters history. This was not just a good shot under pressure. It was the exact kind of moment Augusta seems to produce better than any other tournament in the world. And as incredible as that was for Mize, it also added one more painful chapter to Greg Norman's story at Augusta. Because a few years later, Norman would be on the wrong side of something even worse. The 4. Greg Norman's collapse in 1996. This is one of the great collapses in all of sports, not just golf. Greg Norman began the final round of the 1,996 Masters with a 6-shot lead. 6 shots. In a major championship, that should be enough. More than enough, honestly. The green jacket looked like it was his. Then Sunday happened. Norman shot 78, Nick Faldo shot 67, and just like that, the 6-shot lead was gone. Faldo did not just catch him, he passed him and won by 5. That is what makes this collapse feel so unreal even now. The gap was huge, the stakes were huge, and yet the whole thing unraveled in front of the world. For Norman, it was devastation. For Augusta, it was another reminder that nothing there is ever fully safe. And unlike Spieth's collapse, which felt like one hole detonating, Norman's was more like watching confidence drain out of a player over the course of an entire afternoon. That can be even harder to watch. But if Augusta can destroy players in spectacular fashion, it can also bring them back from the dead. And nobody proved that better than Tiger Woods in 2019. 3. Tiger Woods completes the comeback in 2019. This one is bigger than golf. By 2019, Tiger Woods was no longer the young force who used to crush fields and make majors feel predictable. He was 43 years old. He had been through multiple back surgeries. He had lived through pain, scandal, doubt, and years of people wondering whether he would ever win another major. And then he won the Masters again. That is why this moment feels almost unbelievable. Not because Tiger was unknown, quite the opposite, actually. Everybody knew how great he had been. The shocking part was that after everything that happened, he somehow found his way back to the biggest stage and won his 5th green jacket. Masters.com called it a historic comeback, and that is exactly what it was. What made it even more powerful was the way it happened. It was not vintage Tiger at full power. It was an older, smarter, more careful Tiger. He stayed patient and then took over when the moment was right. Still, as unbelievable as that comeback was, there are 2 Masters moments that feel even more impossible. One because of age, the other because of sheer domination. 2. Jack Nicklaus wins the 1,986 Masters at age 46. By 1986, Jack Nicklaus was not supposed to win the Masters anymore. That was the mood. That was the assumption. In fact, one of the lines floating around at the time was this: he is 46, and nobody that old wins the Masters. That line became part of the story because it captured exactly how people saw him. A legend, yes, but a real threat? Not really. Then came Sunday. Nicklaus shot 65. He played the back 9 in 30, and at 46 years old, he won his 6th green jacket, becoming the oldest Masters champion ever. This is one of those moments that gets more powerful the older you get because you understand what it means to do something world-class after people have already decided your time has passed. Nicklaus was not just beating a field. He was beating time, expectation, and the story everyone had already written for him. And that is why 1,986 is so beloved. It is not just shocking, it is emotional. It is proof that greatness does not always fade quietly. But as magical as that was, there is still one Masters moment that stands above the rest. Because it was not just a win, it was a takeover. 1. Tiger Woods wins by 12 inches 1997. The most shocking moment in Masters history is Tiger Woods in 1997. Not because he won, but because of how he won. Tiger was 21 years old. This was his first major victory, and he did not just beat the field, he destroyed it. He won by 12 shots, which is still the largest margin in Masters history, and at the time, he also set a tournament scoring record. Golf Digest later described the win as something that stunned not just the golf world, but the world, and that is exactly right. This felt like a new era arriving all at once. What makes it even crazier is that it did not start smoothly. Tiger went out in 40 on the front 9 of the opening round. For a brief moment, it looked like maybe the week would be harder than expected. Then he played the final 63 holes at a level Augusta had never really seen before. By Sunday, the tournament was over. The field was playing for second. And that is why this still sits at number 1. A miracle shot is shocking. A collapse is shocking. A comeback is shocking. But a 2-1-year-old turning the Masters into a mismatch by 12 shots? That feels like something from another planet. It was dominance so great that it changed the way people looked at Tiger, the Masters, and golf itself.